Tatiana says she'll cut off all of this because, to tell you the truth, I'm not very warmed up this morning. That's a very poor excuse for someone who's supposed to be clear, or a clear OT, or class 8 auditor, or someone that's been fooling around with Dianetics and Scientology since 1952. I noticed in the last videos that I did, I was attempting to engage in flight because my hands never stopped doing this, and I was unable to actually fly. I found that these are not working as wings. So in today's episode of Phil versus the camera, I'm going to attempt to speak without waving my hands. You'd think that I was from some European country where you could only express yourself moving your hands. So today I'm only going to move my mouth with an occasional hand gesture. Tatiana, as usual, is producing and filming today's episode of whatever this should be called, and I'm the actor pretending to be a great lecturer, as well as someone that's supposed to know something about Dianetics and Scientology. I think as a preamble to what I'd like to say, I will mention that it's necessary, in my opinion, I'm holding my hands the way they do on television so you don't wave them. It's necessary, in my opinion, to understand Dianetics and Scientology by being able to remove them from the setting of the Church of Scientology, and also from the millions of words that LRH, L. Ron Hubbard, wrote, some of which conflict with other words. And as Ron said many, many years ago, you must be able to separate Dianetics and Scientology from my opinions. And he wasn't kidding when he said that, because he, like all of us, had the freedom to express opinions. But he regarded Dianetics and Scientology both as something that were separate from his opinions, and that you had to be able to distinguish between the real thing and his opinions. And that became quite a challenge over the years, and it still is. But I have the temerity, the chutzpah, if you will, to believe that I have a pretty good grasp of what is really Dianetics and what is really Scientology. Now that may be a lot of nonsense, and there may be people who will see this and say, don't listen to that old fool. He doesn't know what he's talking about. But since I go back to 1952, which was a time when I felt that L. Ron Hubbard was at his very, very best. He was a fairly young man. In 1952, he was only 41 years of age. And so his brain, his body, his being were, shall we say, very vigorous and very idealistic. I don't know if you've noticed this, but as people, human beings, even me, get older, there's a tendency to become more conservative, to become less idealistic, to say, oh yeah, well I know all about that. In other words, to become suspicious and mistrustful, because unfortunately life, we're responsible in this case, life tends to teach us these things like, oh yeah, I was trying to be honest and then I got cheated, so now I mistrust and I'm suspicious of everybody and everything until I find out exactly, and I've learned that it's very dangerous to do this, and so I don't ride my bicycle anymore, and I don't run, and this is what happens when the body ages in a lot of people. and they let the aging and the disintegration of their body influence them, just as it did when they were young. So when you've got a young body, you want to run, you want to laugh, you want to pursue the opposite sex, you want to conquer the world, you want to do all these wonderful things. So it's very important to understand the body and its ability to influence the whole thing called a human being. And so the potentials of a young person are often very great and much more adventurous and much more industrious and much more creative. Take the great mathematicians and scientists. Excuse me. These people often create their best ideas when they're in their late teens and early 20s, like Albert Einstein. I only mention him. He's one of many greats who had their greatest moments of understanding and illumination and genius when they were in their 20s, and it's true. The influence of the human body on something that is talked about as the soul or spirit or being is enormous, because planet Earth, in case you haven't noticed, is all about being a human being. This is not a planet, shall we say, of spiritual beings floating around and having laughs and taking it easy and doing all kinds of things because they're immortal, they can't be harmed, they can't harm anything. You know, this is where, like the Greeks described their gods, they came to Earth and they were so impressed with the human bodies that they became them in order to play. The amount of play possible with the human body is unlimited because the life of the body itself is a limitation, and to accomplish big things as a human being, very few people can. It's not that easy. But some people can. They can influence a whole planet, even as a human being. So it's good to remember that the agreement level seems to be we're here to play being human. And it's okay. Some might say, no, that's not right. You've got to remember that you're a lot more than being a human being, and you've got to do this and you've got to do that, and you've got to be more spiritual, and you've got to be more something that has no mass, no motion, no wavelength, no location in space and time, and has the ability to postulate and to perceive. Well, that's okay too, but it's not much fun, really. What's fun is all the adventures of a human, because every day that you're a human being with a body, you're concerned with survival. Like Tatiana's driving over here so that I can sit here and shoot my mouth off, and if she isn't continuously aware of what she's doing behind the wheel of a car, if she lets her attention go elsewhere, there could be a terrible accident. She could kill herself or something. This happens every day with human beings. But the human being is capable of enormous possibilities. Like, I can be driving down the road. At the same time I'm driving this car, I can be computing all the other vehicles that are around me, that are coming toward me, and so forth, and all the time making adjustments without having to think about it to ensure that I'm driving safely and that other crazy people aren't killing me and running into me. And I do this without even giving it a second thought. We are yet to create a computer that can do that. A human being can do it, though. And while they're doing that, they can be thinking at the same time about what they're going to be doing today and tomorrow. Maybe they have other appointments and dates. Maybe they're thinking about what they're going to have for lunch. Maybe they're thinking about sex. All kinds of possibilities can be going on while this enormous ability to solve problems relating to survival is handling a very complicated set of actions called driving a car, sometimes in very heavy traffic. So, no mistaking it, the human body and the computer, the problem-solving ability of a human being concerning survival is enormous. Now, in today's episode of Phil, that's me, Phil faces the camera, ill-prepared for what he's doing. I want to point out that, as I was in our last talk, that there are certain things that can influence the mind-body, the psyche-soma, psychosomatic thing called the human body, which is, by the way, defined as a carbon-oxygen engine running at 98.6 Fahrenheit, okay, with a big brain. Did you know, for example, there are other mammals in the world that also have a big brain? And it's important as a human being to understand that there are other mammals that may be just as intelligent, just as capable, just as amazing as we are. And what I'm referring to are marine mammals like porpoises or dolphins or whales and some other creatures that have big brains but that live in the sea. And I'll come back to them in a moment. But we have big brains and the ability to make tools of destruction. All kinds of things that have been created simply to ensure that the survival urge of the human species is guaranteed. And the lengths we've gone to ensure that have included making hydrogen bombs, because we don't want, back in 1952, the Russians to bomb us into extinction before we bomb them, because they're different than we are. They speak a different language. They have a different political system. Therefore, we have to be able to destroy them so that we can survive as capitalists and individualists and all those things. So look at what the survival urge has led us to do, because we have learned not to trust other humans that are different than we are. I don't want to belabor that point. I think you know what I'm getting at. But anyway, there are certain things that can influence the system, the human system, for solving problems relating to survival. And it's been assumed for long before L. Ron Hubbard came along that these influences may be unconscious or subconscious or not known to the person, which is why they have so much effect. They act on a person in the same way that hypnosis does. Now, if you're really familiar with hypnosis, you know that using hypnosis you can get people to feel and do and be amazing things without even knowing why they're doing it. You can hypnotize some person who's like this and say, now, you're a dog. The person immediately gets down on all fours and starts barking. And you can have the person run around in stage hypnotism or in the room that if you hypnotize them successfully, and they'll do everything they can to be a dog. Now, that's an amazing power, and it's all because you have been able to put something into the mind that the person is unaware of that is influencing them strongly. Okay? Another example of hypnotism I witnessed when I was in college many years ago. There was a big stage demo of hypnosis being done in the psychology department at the University of Miami, and Dr. Grendel Fisher, 1952 or 3 was the year, he had a young lady, very skinny lady, about 5 feet, 2 inches tall. He successfully hypnotized her, and then he told her that she was like a board, like a steel board, and he put her on a thing where her head was here and her feet was here. There's nothing under her body. and then he had a man that weighed probably 250 pounds sit on her stomach. You couldn't stand to do that if you were conscious. But under hypnosis, she was as rigid as a piece of steel. Can you believe it? It's true. Another example he gave was, under hypnosis, he could push a needle through a person's cheeks, a big needle, bleeding and everything, pull it out, tell them there would be no more blood flow and that the wounds would heal very quickly. They did. So Hubbard seized on this idea. Now there's a new idea, because Freud also, in his own way, was very interested in something he called the subconscious mind and its influence on the conscious behavior of people. It's all about behavior. People, for centuries, thousands of years, have been trying to explain, why are some people so damn weird? You know, they go around killing other people, or they mutilate themselves, or they become crazy and dance in the streets, or do things that other people say, that's crazy. So Hubbard was looking, you know, he had had some, as a youth, someone in the Navy that his father knew had told him all about psychoanalysis. Anyway, Hubbard was intending to outdo Sigmund Freud when it came to an understanding of the subconscious. So in his own research, he went looking for what things influence human behavior. And he came up with a very old idea, you can read about it in the dictionary, called an engram. And an engram is defined in the dictionary as a trace recording on a cell, something that affects the cell and affects its behavior. Okay? So, in order to satisfy the conditions of an engram that could influence the behavior of a person, Hubbard was able to find that certain experiences a person has that contain unconsciousness, which is like hypnosis, and pain, real physical pain, mental and emotional pain too, and that have the content of the location where their experience is happening. Like you're walking down the street and a concrete block falls off a building, you're on your way to lunch. You have a friend with you. A concrete thing comes down, hits you in the head, knocks you to the ground. You now have a concussion or a head fracture, and when you wake up, you have no idea what the hell happened. Nor do you have any idea what was said by other people around you. You have no idea of all the conditions that existed on the way to the hospital and the doctors and the whole works. But it's all existing in your subconscious mind now. It's a real engram. Okay? Now, if that engram becomes re-stimulated by something in the environment, you can start getting tremendous headaches, you can start having all kinds of manifestations that you don't understand, that affect your behavior. You've even lost the thing that you were going to do when the engram occurred, which was go to lunch. So Hubbard simply, in something called Dianetics, invented ways, without using hypnosis, to bring forth these experiences, which were pretty unpleasant, and by bringing them back to the conscious mind, they cease to have an automatic subconscious effect on the behavior, the health, the ability to think, all the things that were affected possibly by that engram. Now, when we were doing Dianetics on a person, we didn't start out right away by going for engrams, because that can be too overwhelming and too frightening for a person. What I usually would start out with when I was running, because I had the opportunity to be trained by one of Hubbard's early disciples, depending on the condition of the person, but usually, even if it was a big, strong football player, the first thing I would do would be to have them remember pleasure moments. Because pleasure and survival go together like bread and butter with jelly. So, pleasure moments. Have the person recall pleasure moments. Oh, I don't know about it. Now, can you think of anything you've ever enjoyed experiencing? Yes, when I see Tatiana at the door, I immediately feel better. It's a pleasure moment. She comes in, she gives me a hug, she brings all this great energy, intelligence, youth, beauty, the whole works, and it's a pleasure moment. Okay, I recall that. Now, can you get the feeling of that pleasure moment? Yes, I suddenly feel like I want to go on living. Okay, so you keep exercising the person's ability not just to recall pleasure moments, but, here's the big one, re-experience them. And you keep doing that, and if you do it successfully, I don't care who you do it with, a child, an old person, anybody, someone lying in the hospital, dying, living, whatever. If you only do pleasure moments, I promise you, faithfully, and I'm hoping you don't come after me, but I think I can make this as a promise, you will see the person become more alive. Because people are most alive, not always, but most alive when they are experiencing pleasure. And some pleasure moments are enormous. They lasted a long time. Take sex, for example. If you just run, there's plenty of unpleasant moments connected with sex also, but if you just run sexual pleasure moments, which is okay to do, it's not a dirty thing at all, and have the person really re-experience orgasmic sex and love and passion and those things, you will see them visibly in front of your eyes become more alive, more healthy. A lot of the things that are getting to them and depressing them and hurting them and making them feel lousy can be overcome by running pleasure moments. When I say running, I just mean spending 10, 15 minutes, a half hour, even an hour with a person. Nothing but pleasure. They may even surprise you and themselves by remembering what seems to be, not saying it's true, but seems to be a past life. God, here I am. I feel like, yes, I'm flying an old airplane in World War II, and it's great. I love it. Of course, I was shot down and killed a few minutes later, but I'm flying it. So people, whether these memories are true, whether they're part of the racial consciousness, whether we read it in a book, whether we imagined it, we don't care, as long as it's a pleasure moment. Maybe it's the beginning of existence, when the Big Bang occurred, or when life first manifested. That's what he's remembering. You just accept it and run pleasure. By run, I mean getting the guy to recall it fully and to experience it over and over again in every cell of their body, soul, whatever you want to call it. Don't just get it and pass along quickly. Keep working with them to get the smell of it, the taste of it, the sound of it, the sight of it, the feeling of it, so that their body, soul, whatever, is immersed in pleasure. Pleasure to a human being, and perhaps to any being, equals survival. Pain, on the other hand, is non-survival. So, let's say you've successfully run pleasure moments on a person in 4 or 5 sessions to the point where they're like, you know, it's amazing, but so much of my life has been pleasure. Like when I go back to where I was born and I have a salami sandwich, or I have a Greek salad, or some borscht with a cucumber, or whatever your native land is, what you love to eat, it makes people feel, oh, I feel so good when I'm eating what I really like. Food, another source of pleasure. Don't forget that. Sometimes people say, what do you mean pleasure? Well, how about the time you beat up someone, or the time you raced ahead of other cars and got to the red light ahead of them? You know, the things that give people pleasure. Who can tell? It was making a mud pie and eating it. Who knows? It can become very funny. So, let's say you successfully run run pleasure, which restores what we call theta to the person. Pain we call M theta. M theta because pain mixes us all up and gets us, oh God, that's pain. Pleasure is like, oh, it's so good, it's so nice, I feel so wonderful. I just won the lottery, $75 million. My God, within a few weeks I'll be insane, but for the moment, pleasure. Okay, so you got all this pleasure going. The reason I'm spending so much time with this, if Tatiana will let me, is because this was one of the things that early Hubbard came up with, was the idea of getting a person to re-experience pleasure. And at the same time, you are opening up what we call their life, or their time track, their history of their life of pleasure moments. And you could scan these moments. You could have the person become the pleasure. And then times when they gave pleasure to others, that's another type of pleasure moment. Yes, I gave this poor child a Christmas gift. So pleasure to oneself, pleasure to another, others giving others pleasure, people giving me pleasure, and things. My dog, when a dog comes in, it always loves me. No one else does but the dog. Okay? So pleasure, expand it. You can fix the person up to the point where you won't have to do any more with them. They'll be riding on cloud 29, and they'll be able to tell you, I know what to now do for myself and other people to make this a better world. Bring pleasure to people. Not just physical pleasure, but mental pleasure. The pleasure of understanding. There's so many aspects of this. And you could make a whole science and subject. You could open up an office, and all you do with people that come to see you is work with pleasure. And I'm telling you, your fame would spread from one end of the world to another. Because what we spend so much time doing in the newspapers and everything is the opposite of pleasure. Oh, the stock market is crashing. Oh, the ocean is polluted. Oh, the air is polluted. Oh, we're ruining... It's all true, of course, but it's all about non-pleasure, and you get to the point where what is going to be pleasure? Well, I'll take to the bottle. I'll have another martini. People will do anything. They'll take any drug, take any substance, just to feel some relief of pleasure. What's a cocktail party all about? People have a few drinks, they stop being suspicious, they stop being worried, they stop being suspicious. They start talking too much, they get into trouble, sex. But whatever it is, they start feeling pleasure when they drink. You get a shot of morphine when you're having a kidney stone, and you think, all I ever want is morphine. My Uncle Sam in World War II was World War I was a pilot in an airplane. He was learning to fly at Selfridge Field near Detroit, Michigan, where we all lived. And he cracked up and he was seriously injured. This is my Uncle Sam with giant blue eyes and rocks. He was one of my heroes. So there he was an Air Force cadet, and he crashed up and broke his spine and then fractured his head and everything. And in those days they just gave you morphine without any thought, well, you know, we can make a morphine out of an addict, out of someone if you give them morphine for pain. So by the time he got out of the hospital, he was a morphine addict. So you can use things that get rid of pain and bring pleasure, and then they become addictive, like morphine and heroin and cocaine. And cocaine is another thing. But all of these things that you hear people doing, that children want to take, and marijuana, they all produce feelings of ecstasy and pleasure. And that's one of the main reasons why human beings are so interested in putting so many substances into the body, because they want the body to feel the way it felt when that felt wonderful. All right, so here we go. We've got the guy restored by just concentrating on pleasure, not just for himself, but across all the dynamics. Now, if we were to continue, and I'm not saying we should, the next thing we would do should be the subject of my next talk. So I hope I haven't waved my hands too much, because I'm not really trying to hypnotize anybody. I'm just talking about early Dianetics, L. Ron Hubbard, and how he came up with such a wonderful idea, and how it can be used to show a person how they can not only recall something, but how they can re-experience it. And pleasure is one of those things that doesn't vanish. You can always go into the past and find it and relive it. Unlike pain, you can get rid of pain permanently, but pleasure doesn't get erased. It's there, and I can prove it. If we were doing group processing, which I've done on a lot of people, I'd just have them, there's 20 people, if I'm lucky, listening, and I ask them if they'd all recall a pleasure moment, and it's a miracle. So, I'd like to thank, if there's any listeners or lookers, thanks for listening and looking, and I want to thank Tatiana for putting up with this, and we'll take a break now.